It's sort of like, you know, the day after Christmas in Britain is Boxing Day, where the master and the servants trade places. Well, usually we're out in the audience. So tonight, in honor of Boxing Day, we're going to talk. Several years ago, our home was being bought by the city, and it was going to be bulldozed, and we had to find another place to live. So we thought, you know what, we've always talked about living on a boat. Maybe we'll look at boats. So we went out and we looked at a few boats, and one day, in the city of Burien, yeah, up in Seattle. And we saw an ad that said, ferry boat for sale. And we thought, wow, that's kind of a cool thing to live on. So we went and saw the ferry boat, and it was in terrible shape. We went back a couple of times, and I did a lot of research on this boat, and finally we decided that there was too much work, it cost too much money, and we couldn't afford to moor the thing anyway. So we walked away and we moved to Seaside instead. Now, shortly after we got here, we saw a note in the paper that said that tourists too had come back to Astoria, and they were looking for help in fixing this. Well, Steve has been a marine electrical engineer specializing in ferries for decades. So he volunteers. He said, I'll work as a consultant for you. So we went out to see the boat one day, and we parked, we're walking down the pier at Town Point, and the closer we got to the boat, we're going, wait a minute. This looks really familiar. And sure enough, it was the same boat. The same boat. And we said, well, we don't really need to go inside of it because we know that boat inside out, including the fire damage in the engine room. But more about that in a minute. So you're going to hear from me about the past life of this incredible boat. It has had so many lives, you just can't believe that it is still floating. And then when we get to more of a contemporary, Steve's going to take over and tell you about the work that's being done on it, the preservation work that's been done to date, and the things that, oh, you can't hear me? A little more like that? Okay. So we got to go back in history a little bit first. By the end of the 1800s, the coast was beginning to be very popular with wealthy and upper middle class Portland families. The moms and the kids would stay here in cottages during the summer, and husbands would commute back and forth. And this became known as the daddy train, because daddy arrived on Friday and daddy went home on Sunday back to the city to work. So there was a depot here in, here's a picture of it here in Seaside, of the moms and the kids showing up to meet daddy at the train. Now by 1894, the Astoria-Columbia Railroad was built. It was finished in 1898. Now, freight was its original intent. Am I blocking the screen? Okay, thank you. Freight was its original intent, but tourism quickly turned into a mainstay as people found it was a lot easier to take the train out here than try to drive over those roads. So, in the first 6 years of this train's operation, the population of Seaside tripled in 6 years. This is a picture of Captain Fritz Elvig, the mastermind behind the entire ferry system in Astoria across the Columbia on this end of it. In the summer of 1920, Captain Elvig used a scow, which is a motorized barge, and he carried cars across the Columbia to the other side, to the Washington side, 9 at a time. He carried 700 cars in his first summer, 9 at a time. Look at those great old cars. Isn't that cool? Okay. Now, he smelled success. This guy was no fool. He smelled success. So, oh, I went the wrong way, didn't I? No. So that winter, in the winter of 1921, he incorporated as the Astoria McGowan Ferry Company. Remember that name, McGowan, because he plays a role later on. So remember that name. And he built a new car ferry named the Tourist, which became later named Tourist One because several more followed. It was a wooden-hulled vessel that could carry 15 cars at a time and 30 passengers back and forth between Astoria and Megler on the Washington side. It was built in Astoria at the cost of a whopping $17,000. He launched his new boat on May 21st, took his first load of cars across the river a couple of days later. There was no sea trials, there was no shakedown, there was no practice. Throw the boat in the water and load some cars on it and go. This guy had no time for messing around. I'm getting off track here, aren't I? Okay, throughout the 1920s, summers at the seaside and were more popular than ever, and transportation was needed from Seattle to Olympia. Am I doing it again? Sorry. Okay. So as that new rail service increased on both sides of the river, summer tourism increased right along with it. Not one to miss an opportunity, good old Fritz increased his capacity as well by building the Tourist II. Big surprise, they kind of fell in order, right? The Tourist II, the subject of our presentation. This 22-foot ferry cost a whopping $42,000, less than a nice car today. She could carry 20 cars and 155 passengers. Now, both vessels operated on this route at the same time, going back and forth. Now, this photo shows the North Beach arrival ferry. You'll hear about in just a minute, but it illustrates how the ferries would pull up to the docks at the train depot. They would unload their mail and the cargo and their passengers right onto those rail cars, and the rail cars would continue on up the Washington side onto Olympia and Seattle. This was the narrow gauge Ilwaco rail line. It was originally constructed for getting mail from Astoria to Olympia, but it ended up earning most of its revenue from passengers and from freight, carrying oysters, clams, and cranberries. That same year, motor trucks started using Elving's ferries to access the Long Beach Peninsula. This did not make the railroad happy. It is never good to mess with the railroad's profits. So eventually, the Ilwaco line was on the Washington side, and the Oregon brought passengers. It was a very interesting way that they did that. So trains would bring people from Portland to Astoria, the 14th Street dock, which you can see in that picture right there. Then they would get on the ferry and they would go across to the Megler side, which doesn't look near as nice or as inviting, right? Somehow, Fritz had convinced the city of Astoria to build that ferry dock and terminal for them. Paved roads, parking spaces, all that really nice. But on the Megler side, there was nobody over there to foot the bill, so they had to build it themselves. So it was a pretty slipshod mess. They just drove some piles into the ground and said, good enough, there you go. The ferry crossing took about 30 minutes in good weather to get to the other side. Well, in 1926, there's nothing like success to bring out competition, right? So Elving was doing great, and the railroads were going, he's making money off of my passengers. I bring them to Astoria, he picks their pockets to take them across the water, puts them back on their train, and takes them the rest of the way. We're going to put a stop to that. We're going to make the ferry, and we'll get all the money of it. So they built their own car ferry. It was called the North Beach. And it was a 120-foot long vessel, could carry 25 cars at a time. Union Pacific had their own ferry slip built in Astoria. They built it themselves, and at Port Elise. Which is a little north of Megler, and you can see that's where it is today. When you drive up 410, you can see those pilings out there. Mostly they're just filled with cormorants and seagulls. Yeah, that was the port. That was Port Elise. Now they had a lot of trouble getting started, partly because now their ferries came into the slip. They offloaded the cars, and there was a little ways to go before the road, before the highway. And that piece of land between the end of their ferry dock and the road happened to be owned by J.W. McGowan. And McGowan said, I need to protect my investment in the Astoria-McGowan ferry system. So he made life really, really difficult for the railroad to be able to build that little bit of road to get them up to the little bit of a driveway to get them up to the road. So they had a tough time with that. Also, Captain Elvig was known to hop in people's cars and convince them not to go to the railroad's ferry, but to come across to his. Yeah, this guy didn't miss a trick. Okay. In 1928, this is just kind of an interesting side note, there was an exceptionally cold winter and the river froze. This picture is up at Hood River, but it froze all the way down to Astoria area. So Elvig never wanted to, put his work aside. He put steel plates on the front of the Tourist II and used it as an icebreaker to ram its way through the ice and kept his service going. Union Pacific service was stopped because of the ice, so he got ahead of them. Here is the coolest picture of a car driving across the Columbia River on the ice. Isn't that incredible? So Union Pacific was trying their best to keep up with Elvig's service. And they knew the value of advertising. So what they did is they put up this archway, and it was a couple of miles before they got to the terminal, and directed all the people, come this way, it's this way to the ferry, come this way. and all of their signs tried to direct them to Union Pacific's ferry terminal, but as I said, Elvig would hijack them at the corner and bring them back to his. This is Megler Cove. This is where it didn't work. So in 1930, Union Pacific shut down ferry operations and it sold it to one of their employees, who is Captain Calvin E. Stewart. They claimed they had lost $40,000 a year while they were trying to run this ferry business, and at that time that was a lot of money. So the next year, Stewart incorporated as the Columbia Transportation Company and launched a plan to put Elvig out of business. Can you hear him going, whoa? All right, so he quietly bought up parcels of underwater land around Elvig's ferry terminal. He just quietly bought them up, and then one night he hired some marine pile drivers. They went out there and drove piles right across the entrance to Elvig's dock. It was his property. He could do what he wanted. So, but you know what? Elvig was not a man to be deterred. So now this is where the story gets muddy and kind of falls into folklore. But the story as we hear it is that he backed that ferry up, put it full speed ahead, and rammed right through those pilings. At that point, a fight broke out between the railroad's dock people and Elvig's dock people, and the fight continued until the police came over from Astoria and broke it up. Yeah. This is where the Megler dock was. You guys all recognize that, right? Yeah, the Washington Department of Highways demolished the Megler Ferry landing and constructed the Megler Rest Area in 1968, and then it was renamed Dismal Niche in 2005. Underwent a really nice remodel this summer, too. So, back to the past. The dispute between the two companies continued until Elvig was able to buy out Stewart and combine the two companies together under the name of the Astoria North Beach Ferry Company. This hatch cover from the Tourist No. 2 is still on the boat today. There's several of them that have lasted all this time. This was a postcard you could buy if you rode the ferry. You had a souvenir of it. Ferries left Astoria hourly on the half hour until noon, then hourly on the hour. 55 minutes later, they departed Megler for the trip back, and all of this cost you $1 for a car and a driver. It's listed as Highway 101 because this was the last stretch of 101 that didn't have a bridge or road over it. So this ferry route was considered part of the highway system. There we go. You can see it's listed as Highway 101 right up there. All right. So in 1933, to meet the increasing demand, he built another ship. And this was the Tourist 3. The Tourist 3. Yay, well done. She was another wooden-hulled vessel with an even larger carrying capacity. And very modern lines. This looks a whole lot like the ferries up in Washington now that they're still building today. Steve's babies. Let's see. So life on the coast changed dramatically in 1941. Oops, sorry about that. With the U.S. entering the war. Ships of all kinds were needed for the war effort, and so the Army purchased the Tourist II from Elvig. This was the Army's 249th Coast Artillery. They bought it for $35,000. For a few thousand more, she was refitted for military service. So they really drastically changed the look of the ship above the water. 20 feet of the superstructure was removed off the bow, the wheelhouse and the rudder cables were moved to the back, and she was used to transport troops between Fort Stevens and Fort Canby as they were working up to the war. All right, all that changed one dark night in 1942. On June 21st, a Japanese submarine made its way up, undetected, up the Columbia, and it shelled Fort Stevens. That's a picture of the boat, and there's where the shell hit on the shore. So they landed harmlessly on the sand, and the only casualties was the baseball diamond backstop and one power line. But it was enough to convince the military that we needed better protection around the mouth of the Columbia. So she quickly became a mine layer, and she was renamed the Octopus, converted to the mine layer. She laid mines at the mouth of the Columbia River, and though she was much smaller and not nearly as well equipped as some of the big actual military mine layers, she earned an E for excellence because she was the fastest mine layer in the fleet. Yeah. Here's a very imaginative sketch of it. Pictures of it are notoriously hard to find. The one that you saw was about the only one we've been able to find. And then this is not the Tourist II, but this is how smaller boats were set up to lay mines. They removed all that superstructure, they put tracks in, and the mines were loaded on the tracks, and they just pushed them up and launched them over the end of the boat. So her military career was over at the end of the war, and Captain Elvig was able to purchase his precious boat back from the Army for $35,000. And he rechristened her the Tourist II. This poor boat has been renamed so many times, but now she went back to being the Tourist II. Now that same year, the Oregon Highway Commission purchased Elvig's operation, boats, service, and everything for $163,000, and continued service under the name of the Astoria North Coast Ferry System. Now, he must not have wanted to sell because they ended up having to condemn all of his boats and terminals and properties so that they could buy it from him for $163,000. So something tells me he was not in favor of that change. Okay, so the Highway Commission now was running the ferry service, and they added another boat to the route, and that was the M.R. Chessman. It was a steel-hulled vessel, so the first steel-hulled boat on that route. And it began operating as the largest ferry on the route. Through the 1950s, riding the ferry was a popular family outing. We saw several people say, I love that, on sunny days. So folks would just pack a picnic and go for a day outing on the ferry. Preteens, they recall, people who were preteens at the time recall paying their fare and riding the boat back and forth all day just for the fun of it. And you could buy a soda on the boat for a nickel. So it made a big deal. It was a big day. Here's just some really cool old family pictures. A mink coat and high heels to ride the ferry. Yeah, I've done that so many times. Yeah. And this one, I just love that little cowboy hat on that little kid. I knew his cowboy hat across the river. Now, in 1962, construction of the Astoria-Megler Bridge began. The cost to build the bridge was estimated at $24 million. And when it was completed, it represented the last link in the highway system in an uninterrupted road from Canada to Mexico. It remains the largest continuous truss bridge in the U.S. I wish I could tell you I took this picture. I did not. I wish I knew who did. I'd give them credit because it is the most beautiful picture. Yeah. During construction, then families continued to ride the ferries, and it became even more, knowing it was coming to an end, it became even more kind of a novelty, a fun thing to do. Until the construction ended. So in 1966, in August, Governor Mark Hatfield, along with Miss Oregon, because you always have to have a beauty queen there, and Governor Dan Evans, along with Miss Washington, cut the ribbon to officially open the bridge. Now, I had to include this photo because Miss Washington happens to be my cousin, Sandy Hill, so, you know, I had to include it. She babysat me. She loves it when I tell people that. With the completed bridge in the background, you can see it there, the Tourist II and the rest of the fleet made their last trip. So it was a big deal. People lined up for hours that morning to ride the boats one last time. So the M.R. Chessman, so the boats no longer were needed. So the M.R. Chessman was sold to the U.S. Navy for $300,000. And it was transferred to Vietnam, and it was used as a floating machine shop. It was scuttled at the end of the war, as far as we know. So some of the information said they were positive it was, others said they didn't know what happened to it, but it looks like it was scuttled over in the Vietnam after the war ended. The Tourist I, which is the smallest of the fleet, that very first one, it was sold to a private buyer in Alaska who was going to use it as a floating grocery store. Unfortunately, it stopped floating about halfway up there and sunk. Yeah. The Tourist III was sold to a private fishing company, and it was converted into a floating crab cannery, and from what we could find, it wasn't maintained well and eventually rusted out, and then it was gone as well. But the Tourist II, she still had a lot of life left in her. So she was sold to the Pierce County, Washington, up out of Tacoma. That area up there is Pierce County, where she was renamed the Islander of Pierce County, and she spent 30 more years going back and forth out of Tacoma to the islands up there, carrying cars and people across the Sound. In 1996, after her working career ended, she slid into retirement as a showgirl. She was purchased by Argosy Cruise Lines as a dinner cruise boat and renamed, again, the MV Kirkland, Motor Vessel Kirkland. And she got a glamour makeover, total glamour makeover. They enclosed the open decks in glass, took the solid sides off, put them all in glass, ceiling to floor windows so all the cruisers could see out around Lake Washington. She got velvet drapes. The car deck was carpeted. Oh yeah, it was quite. Brass rails, two wood and brass bars, one down on the main car deck and one up in the upper deck. Oh yeah, she was quite the sight. And she kept partiers warm and dry as they cruised around Lake Washington. Here she is after her refit going through the Montlake Cut between Lake Washington and Lake Union. There's some very fancy houses around there, so the boats would just cruise by and you could see all the multi-billionaire mansions there. So their upper deck bar was added. It was built of horizontal beadboard, so it replicated the look of the older ship. They did a really nice job, in spite of really blitzing her up. The work that they did made her tried to make her look like the original. The benches along the wall, you can still see those are still in place. Those beautiful wooden benches were there from day one, and they are still there. Here's the car deck, converted into a passenger area. another view of the party area. And then her brass rails, those are the red velvet curtains there at the bottom, and a pool table. It was a very popular dinner cruise boat. In 2009, as the MV Kirkland, at the peak of her showgirl career, there she is. Isn't she beautiful? Yeah, she doesn't look like a working boat anymore. Here's an interesting one. This is the portrait we saw earlier of Captain Fritz Elbig, right? And he is posted at this spot in the boat, between those posts. Now, you can't be 100 years old without having a ghost story. So the story is that he likes his portrait there. And if you move it or take it down, bad things start happening around the ship until his portrait is returned to its rightful spot. So no one has been willing to test it again. I guess I had a couple of bad experiences, so Fritz's portrait stays where it is. Things went downhill for the old girl in 2010. An electrical fire in the engine room put her out of commission. A large hole was cut in the deck so the firemen could reach the fire in the engine room, and the engine room was charred. Repairs were deemed to be too expensive, and her run as a glamour party girl was over. All wooden hull vessels, passenger-carrying vessels, have to be taken out of the water for inspection and repairs every 2 years. And that dry docking, and you can see her in dry dock right here, that dry docking costs anywhere between $75,000 and $200,000. You see why we decided not to buy this boat as a Yeah. Interestingly, she was offered to the Astoria, the Maritime Museum in Astoria, and they declined. So, now Steve is going to pick up her more modern day story and all the things that have been happening to her since then.
Okay, you have to understand, Kathy's a natural-born storyteller. She teaches classes all the time, things like that. I'm an engineer. I have no sense of humor. I can't make things up on the fly, so bear with me, okay? Let's see if I can figure out the buttons there. Oh, okay, right one. Okay. This is the individual that owned the boat when we were looking at it and when it came down to Astoria. This is Captain Christian Lint, a real character. He's got lots of old boats. He got an ancient tugboat. He made it work again. He worked up in Alaska for a long time. He travels up and down the west coast finding old boats that are about to sink and somehow keeps him from doing that. And the Astoria Ferry was one of them. When he acquired the boat, he paid $10,000 for it, compared to all those other numbers you heard. He rented it out as a event location, you know, weddings, things like that, parties, and he had it up in Bremerton and that kind of area, and that's where we saw it. But what happened was, he did put it up for sale. Whoops, what did I do, push the buttons? Oh, sorry about that. Okay, Jake Jacobson was a guy in Astoria, grew up there, made a self-made man, and he's the one that owned the Cannery Pier Hotel. And somehow he became aware that this boat was for sale. And he remembered riding this boat when he was a kid, and went up and looked at it, made some kind of agreement with Christian, and they decided to bring it back down to Astoria. So he was the instigator of this whole thing, and we appreciate the help. Unfortunately, a little after the boat got here, Jake passed away, and the ferry lost its godfather, and that's too bad. He was quite a guy. But a commission was formed, It was called the Ferry Boat Association, I believe. It was a nonprofit and based out of Astoria, made up of a lot of local business people and other community members that wanted to see this thing work. So what happened, Christian brought the boat back down. There's Christian. Does that look like a character? Okay. He initially legally renamed it the Tourist 2, and with some support from Jake, Christian and his engineer Jim Peacock did bring the boat back down the west coast here. Let's see if I remember everything. And remembering it had a big fire in the engine room. Some things just no longer worked, okay? But he got them up and running somehow. And they somehow made it back down to Astoria. And it wasn't a smooth sailing. They had some problems on the way down. Parts broke. Somehow they found some replacement parts when that happened. Continued the journey. Then had some really bad weather. Had to go into port for a couple of days. Once the bad weather passed, they were able to bring the boat back all the way down into Astoria. Oh, sorry, I keep pushing the button accidentally. Let's see where we at. And eventually made it to Astoria. Here they're going underneath the bridge. And it looks mighty good there. He put some flags up, I guess, for the entrance into Astoria. Just to impress people. And finally got to port. It ended up going down to Tongue Point for a while, because that's about the only moorings that was available that they could afford at the time. And once they got here, that's Christian and his engineer, and they were real happy to have finally made it down the coast. Yeah. But I gotta ask you, would you buy a used boat from either one of these guys? So as I said, there was a group of people got together, created this nonprofit organization. This is some of them. The membership in that has changed a little bit over time. They're all good people. They put in a lot of hard work and time and money and things like that. And I do think I owe it to them to throw out a few names here. They spent like 2 years, trying to make this thing happen. Some of those people, Cindy Price, former councilwoman for Astoria, Bill Young, Tom Brownson, Andrea Larson Perez, Bruce Foley, Dave Green, Dulcie Taylor, Joe Leahy, and Lucian Swerdlock. So you might recognize some of those names. Oh, I'm blocking it now. And like I said, the membership changed, and there were a lot of other people involved in this project. I can't name everybody, so just have to appreciate how much work went into this. And just a little indication. The boat had this up on the smokestack, indicated when it was built. So it's the real thing. The boat turned out to be a real crowd favorite. People enjoyed going on board and seeing the boat. We didn't take them down the engine room because you didn't want to go there. You'll see why in a minute. Okay. But they did try and use the boat as often as they could in community events. It took place in the regatta when it came along that first year the boat was there, and they actually won Best of Classic Vessels in the regatta. Now, remembering the boat was built in 1924, it had some just beautiful workmanship on board and things you just don't see anymore. Of course, that Henschel sound-powered telephone, that's on every Navy boat that's ever been built since 1850, I think. So that's not all that present, but that hand wheel there, that steering wheel, that could get you a fortune if it was in an antique shop. boat, just another, oh, I forgot, there, another view of that hand wheel. Gorgeous. That's all I can say. Older navigation devices like this compass, again, an antique, worth a mint if it ever came off the boat. But not everything about the boat was beautiful. Like we said, it had a fire. This is the overhead of the engine room. And what had happened, if I remember this correctly, it wasn't a fuel line. Something leaked on top of one of the electrical pieces of equipment. It shorted out and caught fire. And it was a short fire. It made a lot of smoke, and the fire department, had to actually cut holes in the deck, like Kathy said, trying to put it out. So it did burn a lot of the overhead and a lot of that wiring. Let's see. Whoops. What did I do? Where's the?
Pointer's right in the middle.
Right in the middle. Oh, there we go. Okay. A little hard to see here, but there's a lot of wire and hose and stuff from the ceiling, and a lot of that was simply burned through. So much of the electrical system of the boat didn't work anymore. And how Captain Lynn got that thing down here with no electricity on the boat, beyond me. But you go down inside the engine room, and there's control boxes where he's opened it up, hand-wired jury-rigged jumpers around relays and things like that to make the bow thruster work and things like that. It is amazing. I don't know how he got it down here. Another picture of the engine room. Again, the fire started over in this area, so that's where it was the worst in the overhead. But further down the engine room you would go, it wasn't so bad. And overall, the actual damage to the boat itself, other than the wiring, wasn't that bad. The timbers were scarred up a little bit and sooty, but Coast Guard inspected it, and some local ship people inspected it, and it was determined that most of the wood was in good shape. They didn't have to replace the entire boat. And like I said, lots of people volunteered to work on this boat. Here's two. You might recognize him. I don't know who that guy is. But there was many more. And what happened was, I mentioned the name Lucian. Yeah, I think I got that right. He was a teacher down at the school for at Tongue Point. And they have young men and women that are being retrained, let's say. Kathy, you remember what the name of the school is? I can't think of it. Job Corps, sorry. Job Corps, there we go. And so Lucian brought them up here to work on this boat as part of their training. And they were invaluable. They did the majority of the work, especially ripping out old rotten wood. If it hadn't been for them, a lot of that wouldn't have gotten done. As well as there was a lot of help from local businesses, a lot of donations or reduced pricing on equipment, wood, and things like that. So Astoria, the whole town came together trying to put this boat back together. So besides the engine room, there were some little things about the boat that needed some fixing up above deck, let's say. So, there's some rotten wood here and there. And that just happens to wood that's in a marine environment but out in the air. If you don't paint it every other day, that's what happens. Okay, little things like that, okay? There are also some not so little things. This is some major rotten wood, and it's in some areas where it was not just boards on the side keeping the water out. This is major structure we're starting to talk about here, okay? Not that good and hard to fix. Now I said that was a little thing. This is the, whoops, sorry. The deck. What they found was the deck was probably about the worst part of this entire vessel. It was rotten just about everywhere. And once they pulled up one board, they'll find another board that was worse. And so this is what they were having to try and deal with in trying to fix this boat. And basically all this would have to be replaced. But that little part you saw it was just one little corner of one little part of the boat. Like I say, the entire boat deck needed fixing and replacement. But in a few places, whoops, I'm too far here. Okay, this looks bad, but it's not so bad. This is up in the pilot house. And all it really needed was a little coat of paint. And it looks much better. So they did a lot of that. They painted just about anything they could that wasn't rotten already and didn't need replacement, and put some flags out on it, and the public would see something that looked pretty decent, you know, and want to come on board. Yeah, this is a little more of that deck that was bad. This is on the other end of the boat. And so the Job Corps was in here pulling up all these old planks, and then they get down to these major beams inside, and some of those major beams were rotten. Replacing those is almost more than the boat is worth to even think about replacing them. That's all old, original old growth fir and oak, things like that. And you just can't come by that much anymore. But that's what the Job Corps is doing. Is in here pulling this stuff up, trying to get the rotten wood out. So as I said, these were students from the Job Corps. They worked hard, but every once in a while, they go have a good time. There was still a pool table inside the car deck area, and this old organ. No one's quite sure why that organ was there, but it was, and it worked. So they get a little free time to themselves and enjoyed that. And they weren't the only ones who had a good time. This is Christy over here. I think this is Tulsi, I think, and there's Christian. And they worked hard, and when they weren't working hard, they were having a good time, having a little drink. I went up there several times myself and shared wine with them, so that was always fun. So, the end of the story, after almost 2 years of trying to fix this boat up, raise money, get volunteers, get donations, things like that, the committee finally came to the realization, especially after the Coast Guard came on board, gave them a final determination of the things they need to do to get this boat up where it could carry passengers and take tours in the outside Astoria and the river. Also, they brought down some experts from Port Townsend in Northwest, who's a wood boat haven of technology and knowledge. Came down, inspected the entire vessel. They came up with an estimate that it would cost a little over $1 million to get this boat back up and running. Other problems were simply a place to take it out of the water, to dry dock it. There's almost no place short of going to Portland that could dry dock this boat to fix it up. So, coming to that final realization, they finally decided they couldn't do it. So, they basically turned the boat back over to Christian, and he was disappointed that they couldn't finish their mission. But he understood He wants to keep that boat here in Astoria. And what happened, and I just found this out, this only happened, let's say, a week ago, and I don't know a lot about who these, what this organization is, but a new nonprofit organization, and it's called the Vintage Vessels Preservation nonprofit, 501c, have been created. They now basically own the vessel. Christian is one of the board members of that nonprofit, and also Dan Schofield, I believe that's how you pronounce it, who's the owner of the Atomic Hotel there in Astoria. Him and Christian are good buddies, and they are going to try and do something with the boat. They're not sure what yet. They've just formed this new nonprofit. They haven't made up their minds yet just how they're going to use it to do something with the boat. They do want to keep it in Astoria, and there are ways to still assist these folks. If you get any time or knowledge, you want to contribute, you can contact the nonprofit. Their email is vintagevesselspreservations.gmail.com. So if you're inclined, it's still going to be around. They're looking for help. And one more. These were some of the things under consideration the last time I heard anything. And again, Christian has no deficit of strange concepts of any kind. So he said, hey, it could be a restaurant, a casino, nightclub, open for tours, anything like that. He doesn't know what he wants to do with it. He's always coming up with new ideas. And so now with this nonprofit controlling the boat, I'm sure they'll come up with some way to use the boat here in Astoria. Keep it going. So, thank you. Any questions? I'm not sure I can answer, but I'll try. Hard to believe there'd be no questions. Come on. How many would like to see something like that going on the riverfront? Being able to go out and have dinner or a cruise or something like that. Wouldn't that be tremendous? We could probably serve you a sandwich on the trolley or something like that. We can't compete with that. That would be just tremendous. So I'll try to find out the link to that, put it on our Facebook page so you can get a hold of them, maybe get on a mailing list or something like that. Figure out where you can put a few dollars to help support them, keep this idea going. I think it's something, it's not specific to Seaside, but everything that's North Coast related helps us too. And it's just another reason why it's so great to live here. And so next month, get my notes here, we're going into a different category. We've talked about transportation here this month. Next month we're going into natural history, and you're going to learn things you didn't know about Haystack Rock. Both the wildlife refuge that it is, of the sea reserve there, and just the natural history where it came about. Now you're going to have one of my favorite speakers. It's been here several times now, and that's the director of the Cannon Beach Museum, Elaine Murdy-Truck. She is just so interesting. The hour just flies by. So, like I said, that's the last History in Hops for this year. Be sure to pick up, one of our, I think I got some newsletters back there. There's some membership forms. You want to renew your membership or start a brand new one, either one. Our museum is open every day except Sunday from 10 to 3.
And we're looking forward to 2020 to be a pretty interesting year. Where kind of the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to start hearing more and more about the 100th anniversary of the prom. You know, you saw some of the history here. The Tourist II Ferry, 1924, stopped service in '66, and then came back in 2016. So, you know, almost 100 years worth of history right there. And that's one of the things I love about the North Coast. There's a lot of really cool history here. So if there's nothing else, I hope you all had a Merry Christmas and that you have a really great New Year. Thank you.